Okay, so welcome to this course on HTML5 where we're going to be looking under the hood and seeing all those great new features that HTML5 gives us as web developers. Now, something to note, if you are new to HTML or to HTML5, it's perfectly fine because HTML5 is so far the easiest HTML. And the reason for that is because it does away with the need for plugins. Now, HTML4 was released in 1999, and then we had XHTML and so forth after that. But even then with XHTML, we didn't see much of an improvement. You couldn't do video, you couldn't do canvas animations, you couldn't do any of that stuff. So what we did as web developers is we had to use plugins such as Flash and Java applets in order to create animations. Now, this became a big problem, and it still is a big problem because our end users have to constantly keep downloading and updating their plugins in order to view our interactive websites. But now with HTML5, it's a complete game changer because we don't need our end users to install plugins, which is a major bonus. Plus, all the browsers are competing with one another to get the best results out of HTML5, and so that allows our applications to run quicker and faster, whereas with plugins, they're only written by one company, so they are no longer in competition, which means that they're not really pushing to, get the best out of their plugin or fix loads of bugs. So this truly is revolutionary for the web. Now, let's get on to the HTML5 itself and learning all about it. Basically, the first thing that I'm going to show you is the elements that have obviously been removed, the ones that we don't need to bother with or we need to work around. Now, you'll notice with HTML5, it no longer wants you styling your pages in HTML. It wants you to style your pages in CSS. So, for example, the U, S, and strike tags have all been taken out, and you have to use the CSS text decoration property. Okay, so those tags were there basically to put a strike through your text or to underline your text and so forth. They're all gone. You should be using CSS to style your pages. Now, I've always gone by that rule, so it's not affected me. But if you do style your pages in HTML, you've got to change your ways. Also, base font, TT, and big, again, these are all to do with styling the font, giving it colour, possibly choosing the size, what font family, and so forth. Again, use the CSS font property because CSS is optimized to style the page. XMP never really caught on. In fact, it's only me doing this course that actually found out about the tag XMP. I've never used it before, but it's there to basically define pre-formatted text. But instead, we should be using the pre-tag, okay, the pre-element instead of that tag right there. Also, a few structural elements have disappeared, such as frame, frame set, and no frames. They've all gone. You're still able to use iframes though, but nobody really uses frames for structuring their pages. I mean, come on, I've not seen one website with frames structuring its pages. And you should really be using div tags, or if you're in HTML5, the new markup elements. And at the worst case scenario, use tables, but hopefully you stay away from those tables and frames and you go with your div tags and your new markup elements. Now, the acronym tag, again, I didn't know this one existed until I did this course, but the acronym tag, basically, if I was to say something like United States, an acronym for the United States is the US. And so that tag has been scrapped, and instead we use the APPR tag. And I like to think of APPR as abbreviation, okay? We're just abbreviating what we're trying to say. Then we have dir, that was used for creating directory lists. Again, I've never used this one before, most web developers probably haven't. If you want to create a directory list, I recommend using some sort of list format such as an unordered list or an ordered list or something like that. Then we also have center. Again, we should not be styling our pages inside of HTML anymore. We should be using as much CSS as possible. So we basically have to use the CSS align property. in order to center our content. Applet was used for embedding Java applets in the page. Again, that's all gone out of there, and we have to use the object tag instead. Okay, and the object tag is also what we use to embed Flash. So some web developers should be familiarized with that tag right there. Now, as well as, you know, HTML5 cutting out some of the bloat of the HTML4, we've also got significant changes with our tags. So for example, if you wanted to define a doc type in XHTML or HTML4, you'd have to write 2 lines of code, and nobody would write that. They would either copy and paste it from another document, or they would let the program generate it for them. Well, now with HTML5, it's so easy to declare a HTML5 document. So, for example, all you've got to do is say doc type HTML, and that's literally it. And the fantastic thing about this is that older browsers can still understand this doc type, so that's really fantastic. Also, defining a character set is much easier in HTML5. It's cut it right down. All you have to say is meta char set and then UTF-8 encoding, because obviously our end users are not robots. They cannot read 1s and 0s. They have to read symbols, so that's what our character set's there for. And so now, because these 2 elements are much cleaner, we also have a cleaner document object model, which is the structure of your document. So this is a HTML5 document at its absolute bare bones, and you can see that it already looks much cleaner than HTML4 or XHTML. And again, this follows on to the script and style tags. The script tag, you no longer need to define it as text/JavaScript, no need for that. And the style tag is no longer needed to have a type of text/CSS as well, because they are automatically set in HTML5. Now, in the present day, not everybody has a HTML5 enabled browser. So, what you need to do is define the type, okay? I still recommend defining the type just for the sake of older browsers. But if you want to go with the full HTML5 support, then go ahead and just say script and style, and they will be set automatically in HTML5 browsers. So now we have different ways of formatting our text in HTML5 than we did in HTML4. Now, not all of these elements are brand new, but they have now different meanings in HTML5. So, for example, the EM tag is not new, but its definition is different, because what it is defining is emphasized text, which means that it's giving some text significance over all the other pieces of text in a sentence, a paragraph, or whatever it is that you're trying to write out. So, for example, if I was to turn around and say, today is a lovely day, I would add the emphasis around the word lovely, because that's what I want to add significance to. So the EM tag is generally good for descriptors. Now we also have the strong tag. Now the strong tag in HTML4 was used for emphasized text, but now it is there to define important text. So for example, if I said something like, I turned round and I saw a big grizzly bear, I would add the emphasis around the word big, because that is the descriptor, and strong around the word bear, because obviously that's the most important thing in the sentence. Now we also have small. This is great for small print, as the tag says in its name. So that could be for disclaimers, copyright, or any legal information. It can also be for any sort of small print on the page that's generally found in the footer or side content, but it can be placed anywhere. The I tag has changed. In HTML4 that was used for italics, but now we use the I tag as alternative text, such as the mood, atmosphere, voice, or technical term. The B tag is now used for different styling of the text. So again, you could style the text bold if you wanted, but also if you wanted different coloring of the text, if you want to put a strike through the text, whatever you want to do, if it is styled differently, use the B tag. And finally, we've got a brand new tag called WBR. And WBR is basically defining a word break. So if I had a long piece of text, which is 100 letters long, okay, and if I was to shrink the browser down, you'd find that you would get a horizontal scroll bar when the word can no longer fit in the browser window. And so that can create an undesired effect. So therefore what we need to do is create word breaks in there. So what it's going to do is it's going to break that word up into smaller sections so that the horizontal scroll bar goes away. So now let's actually put this into practice. Let me show you a quick example. I have a sentence here that says, I love the sound of the birds and the air was filled with joy. Okay, now first of all we have a descriptor in here, which is love. Okay, so we are going to add the EM tag around the word love because I want to add significance to that. Now we're also going to have the strong tags placed in there. This is going to define the important parts of the sentence, which is the birds. Obviously the birds are making the sound and so forth, or you could just have birds on its own with the strong tag wrapped around that. We don't have any small text in here. Yes, this is smaller, but this could be like heading 1 and that could be heading 2. Again, the small is only really there to define copyright, disclaimers and so forth. Now the I tag is here for the mood or atmosphere. Now please don't get mixed up with the differences between a descriptor and, you know, the atmosphere and the mood. It's very easily done. So for example, you could have joy as a descriptor, which technically it is, but I'm on about the atmosphere. The air was filled with joy, so that is the atmosphere itself. So the atmosphere is joyful, so therefore I would add the I tag around the word joy. Also, you'll notice that love, the birds, and joy, with a full stop, are all pink. So therefore they are styled differently. So I would use the B tag to style them differently. So now let's actually do this inside of a real HTML5 document. So if I go ahead and open up Dreamweaver, you'll see that we've got our page set up, but you'll see that it's in the old doc type. And again, as you can see, nobody could remember this doc type right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert this document into HTML5. So what I'm going to do is change all of this to HTML. Okay, so I'm deleting all of that and just changing it to HTML. So that automatically is now a HTML5 document. Now there is a big problem because the XML and S equals and then XHTML, this is all gone. This can no longer be applied. That has completely disappeared from HTML5. You do not need that at all. Okay, and the meta element has also changed, and we are defining the same character set, which is UTF-8, but we don't need all of this stuff now. But you can keep that if you are providing support for older browsers. Okay, so that's also important to remember. Okay, so I'm going to leave that in there just to add that little bit of fallback to older browsers. But the great thing is, again, with the doc type, it's still usable in older browsers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move this up a tad so that we can see our sentence right there, and I'm now going to write that out. So we'll do this first in headings. So we've got header 1, okay, and we've got header 2, like so, and then I'm going to quickly write this out. I love the sound of the birds and the air was filled with joy. Okay, and put a full stop in there. Alright, so we have everything laid out. So now what we need to do is add a little bit of those elements into our sentence. So first of all, again, we had the word love, and we wanted to add significance to that, so we add the EM tag around it. Then we also had a word in there that was important, which was birds, so we add the strong tags around that. strong, like so. And then finally we had the mood of the atmosphere, which was joy. So I'm going to wrap joy with the I tags. Now also remember that you're just putting whatever content you're trying to refer to in those tags. Do not put any punctuation or anything else in those tags unless you absolutely have to. For example, full stops, apostrophes, and so forth. Now also, because these are styled differently, as you can see, they're all pink. Now yes, you could style them by defining their tags. So I could say EM, strong, and I. Okay, and I could say set those to be pink. Okay, but you shouldn't really be doing that because that's not what they're there for. They're just there to define what that word or that string of text is, whether it's important, whether it's describing a mood or atmosphere, or whether it's more significant. But for styling, we need to add the B tags, okay, like so, around each of these words because they are styled differently. And oh yes, we have the that's styled differently there as well, so we need to wrap those around, which is a great feature. If we just click there, wrap tag, and just wrap it in the B tag like so, and I can do the same here. And don't forget the full stop is also in pink as well, so we want to wrap that around with the B tag like so. So then that is now basically the right typography for HTML5, and we can style that very, very easily by just referencing one tag rather than several. Now we're going to move on to the word break. Okay, so I'm going to just change this down to a paragraph. And it's also important to note that I have tried word break on header 1 and header 2 and so forth, and they do not break. Okay, so if you want word break to work, you need to be doing it on a paragraph. So either one is fine. So essentially what I want to do is I'm going to write that sentence out, but I'm going to write it in one long string like so. Now, contrary to the new HTML5 typography elements, we also have the new HTML5 page structuring elements that allow us to structure our pages better and have more depth and understanding. So, the first thing that we're going to cover is the header. Okay, now the header could be a heading of anything. It doesn't have to be right at the top of the page. It could be a certain section, a certain part, a left menu, a right menu, a header of a footer. It does not matter. Okay, even though a header of a footer would be a strange place to put a header, but a header can be basically any heading that you can think of. So for this little demonstration, I'm going to show you Justin's Cartoon Smart blog, okay? And essentially, if I was to place a heading element, okay, I would obviously place one at the top. That's my heading. It contains a search, you know, all these little bits and pieces, the logo and so forth. So that's really the heading across the top. And yes, you can embed navigation inside of a heading and so forth, and vice versa. So, for example, here is a nav element, okay? Now if I was to go back and look at this, you'll see a nav element is for a navigation bar or a menu bar, whatever you want to call it, and essentially it doesn't matter whether it's horizontal or it's vertical or anything like that. It doesn't matter. It's all nav elements, all for navigation. So essentially this is a navigation right here, a nav element. So I've created, or the blog's created, the nav element right there, and nested inside of that I can put a header element, okay? So I can always nest a header element inside of different parts of the page. Whatever it is, whatever heading it is, you can embed it. And another great example is this blog post. This blog post I could say is a section, and again we'll be getting onto sections in just a second. But essentially I have this section, and in that section I'm going to nest in a header element. So again, headers can be found everywhere. Now, as you just saw, we've learnt the nav, okay, and again, if I was to go through all the navigation, you will see that there is a navigation. We have a heading and a navigation and a heading and a navigation, okay, and essentially we have three different nav elements with a heading or a header element embedded in there. So if I was to illustrate this a little bit better, I would draw that a little more. I would have three nav elements, okay, like so, and in each nav element I would have a header element nested right inside, okay? So the only real time that you want to make headers on their own, or header elements on their own, is normally right at the top of the page. In other cases, you want to nest them inside of whatever you're trying to relate it to. So if I wanted to relate a heading to a navigation, I would nest it inside the nav element. If I wanted to basically embed a header in this section right here, which is this blog post, if I wanted to obviously relate this header to this section, I would nest the header element inside of that section. So it's quite important to remember that, and don't forget that there are a few other sneaky little navigations down here as well, okay? And also, as we are moving on, we have got a section. Now a section can contain multiple things, okay? It can contain articles, headers, footers, it can contain images, it can contain all of those stuff. So a great example is a blog post like so, okay? And this blog post is one entire section. And inside of there we have a header element, some details about this particular section or blog post, however you want to describe that. And we also have an article written here. We know this is an article obviously because of the format that it's laid out in. And we also have some multimedia content inside of here. Okay? Like so. So essentially this section, this whole blog post is a section and it contains multiple elements inside of it. Now we're going to be discussing each of these elements on their own, but what's important to remember is that a section can contain multiple content. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that. And now we have the article, so we're going a bit more in depth. So, for example, obviously I have my section, and right here, let me change this back to yellow again. Right here, I have an article. Alright? Now, an article can be, you know, whatever you want it to be. It can be as long as you want it to be. It does not matter. But this entire thing is an article. Okay? That's fairly self-explanatory. And an article could be, you know, sort of, you know, like in magazines and newspapers, you know, they have those thin little columns in there. Each column could be an article. Also, an article does not have to, it's basically dependent on itself. It does not have to relate to anything on the page. It's just its own element sitting there on the page. A side is content that is pushed to the side as described. Like so. If I was to zoom out quite a bit, you'll see that aside from all of this blog posts and navigations and all the rest of it, you'll see that we have lots and lots of pictures, maybe adverts, advertising stuff. But what's great is about this here is that most of this stuff is actually relating to what's being posted in the blog. And again, with adverts and everything else, they are respective to, you know, what the page content is, because everybody who's at least got a tiny bit of knowledge about marketing knows that if you've got a blog, you know, teaching you how to bake cakes, you don't start advertising power tools on that, because you're not going to make any sales whatsoever. Maybe the very rare one or two, but the aside content is supposed to be related to the page. So this is a great example. So this right here, all along and all the way down the bottom, all the way to the bottom of the page, except for those little nav elements down there, this is all aside content because it's aside from the main content, but it's still relating to the content that is being produced. Okay, now again, this doesn't have to be a big main section, okay, or big main part of the page. This element could also be side content in a blog post, side content of a video. It could be anything, okay? You can just have a little side content in that blog post. Again, as long as the content that's in that aside element is relating to the main information, then you can have that as an aside. Also, we have details. So again, in the blog post, we have discovered already that we have our main section, we have our header element, and we also have details. Okay, so this right here is again explaining who's posting it, when it was posted. You could also have when it was deleted, you know, very generic stuff like that, just giving basic details about the document, when it was created and so forth.